Smart mode and go ahead and hit the smart mode. First attendance today. As we get underway. So let's stand back a little bit. That is quite fun. My name is Steve Marty. I'm Chief of District and School. And with you today, joining me today is my colleague, Sam Pearson, who is our deputy commissioner, and Ron Top, who is the assistant commissioner of the turnaround for the department. Just want to say how great it is to be with you all today at breakfast too. And excited about what you will be sharing with you all over the next couple of hours. A couple of housekeeping items. Restrooms are through this door to the that and I right on left. And also want to share that. Is everybody able to connect with that? Okay. All right. So a couple of other little housekeeping items to share. We will be trying to leave most of this time today, as we have in all of our sessions, for discussions and hearing from you as we talk about school funding and specifically the state and local contribution. This week, Sam and I started this yesterday in Jackson, yesterday morning, Martin, yesterday afternoon, so with you all in Cumberland this morning, and in Cleveland this afternoon. We go to Jarvis City in Knoxville on Thursday, and last week in Dixon on Friday. So clearly, lots of conversation about funding, and I can't say how much I appreciate it. It's such a good time all being here today. I will put that back up in just a moment. It's like they almost had. Good. One of the things that we will start with, and I hate to turn my face to it, I cannot read that in here. We started all of these sessions with a statement, whether they were at town halls or in these settings, and that's what we will start with today. That I will just read to you before we begin our discussion. The Tennessee Department of Education is excited to work with you on this opportunity to discuss the state's formula for funding public education. The Before we begin, the department would like to remind you of the following. Conversations on this topic are not intended to reflect on the current DEP funding formula. The current DEP funding formula will remain in its place until a new funding formula is recommended to and approved by the Tennessee General Assembly. The public is encouraged to submit comments in writing to ensure that all communications are thoroughly documented and can be reviewed and considered in the future. Public comment is encouraged to focus on developing a new funding formula rather than revising the current funding formula. Consider what should be funded in the new funding formula and at what levels. Subcommittees to be responsible for reviewing public comment and making recommendations for what should be included in a new funding formula. While all committees, subcommittees, and members of the public should feel free to communicate openly, documents and records may be subject to public inspection pursuant to the Tennessee Public Records Act and may be posted publicly or otherwise made available. All recommendations that are submitted by committees and subcommittees will be reviewed and considered, but not all recommendations will ultimately be included in the proposed new funding formula. So that is just that front end disclaimer that this is a conversation we're continuing having this week, and those will continue into the month of January. But just be aware that your comments will likely go into a subcommittee and will continue to be discussed as this new funding formula is developed. So today, I just want to walk you quickly through the agenda, and then we're going to sit and talk through who's in the room and why. But really appreciate you all being here. We will start with some feedback on what we're hearing so far on the state portion of the discussion that's happening across those 18 subcommittees. And then we're really going to target in on a very specific topic today, which is the state and local contribution and how that will be determined over as we rethink this funding model. We will spend the majority of the time talking through the process and some discussion, and simply just to hear from you and to collect your feedback on some things specific to local, state and local contribution. And then we'll close with a time with questions and answers. I will let you know that my colleagues will have to leave a little bit early to get to the next location. That change to Eastern time gives us every time. So I will be with you till the end and look forward to what I know will be a very fruitful and helpful discussion. I do want each superintendent in the room to kind of let us know who else you brought today that's representing your group, community, your district. And we are going to start with community studies. So you're board members from Overton County?
We're at the central office.
So central office staff in Overton County, in the back. Wonderful. In the back, please.
Yes, Kenny. White County.
White County, okay. You will stay. And you all need to have the color.
So Michael Wilson, who is our representative, and our mayor,
Only holds Macon County, I have Macon County Mayor Steve Jones.
Wonderful. Yes.
White County, Jason McDonald, the chair, where I have with me, Chet Martin, our finance director, and Deputy Officer, county executive.
Great.
Grant Wallace, Warren County, I've got the board chairman, Tom Colwell, our county executive, Haley, Justin Cotton's our finance director, and Scott Ruby is our finance, our county commission finance.
Great. Well, being here. Let's go here.
Morgan Keys, Putnam County, I have CFO Martin Reynolds, County Mayor, Mason Ford,
Welcome. Next.
Charlotte Banger, county jurisdiction, so I have our county bailiff, Greg Wilson. My finance person, John Hoffman, and supervisor, special projects, that he's concerned.
Wonderful.
Diane Elder, Pickett County, and I have me.
Wonderful. Thank you for being here tonight. We're kind of, we had one person here before, so we're really glad to see you this morning.
Patrick, central office staff, county mayor, James Gridley, and Commissioner Britton Park.
Linda's department, I've got my chair for our county manager, Greg Ridley, and, our finance manager, James Ritchie, and, our county commissioner, Matt Hall. Thank you all for being here. Yes.
Charles County, like usual, chairman of our county commission, our chairman pro tem and chairman of our education committee, Bill Hurd.
Wonderful.
Good morning, Freddie Curtis, Cannon County, with us, our financial director of the county, Mr. Hickman, our county commissioner, Mr. Ryan Hankin, and our board chairman, Mr. Jennifer Davis. So, thank you.
Wonderful, nice to be here. And last but not least,
Very Smith, let's go with Smith County, got County Member Jeff Mason, Central Finance Officer, wonderful.
wonderful. Did I miss anyone or anyone that didn't get to say who represented this morning here? Well, and I think it's really important that we kind of take that kind of moment to know who's in the room and the why behind. When we talk about school funding, we know that this is, yes, the portion of that is about determining what state funding will look like. There's also the division and thinking about that, the divide between the state and the local contribution. And so when we were talking about this specific conversation, it is certainly not the one that could be had, it could be without me being here. So on behalf of our team, thank you for taking the time this morning. And so as you heard, we have commissioners, we have mayors, we have board members, board chairs, we have representatives, we have finance directors here in the room. And we are the magnitude of all this is not lost on us, which is why we are making this first kind of engagement opportunity across the state this week to begin to have the conversation about the state and local contribution and how that looks. And many of you, I think some of the things that are important to us is also that we talk about the division of work and responsibility for education, knowing that at a very local level it impacts you. What I can say, I know we have underscored this week so far, is that every community looks different. Every structure is different. And so certainly, as with most things, there is no one size that fits all, otherwise we all will be sitting here. We'd all be doing all the other work that's piling up back in the system or others otherwise. So important to have you all and have your voice in this first conversation. And it's also one that's going to continue. I wish I could say that we did one meeting and that was sufficient. We all know that's not going to work. And so again, first of additional conversations that have come as more information about the is developed and determined by the subcommittees. As with all the work we do, we talk about how this connects back to the larger mission of the Department of Education. And one thing that Sam and I both get to do, we get to lead the work that works behind the scenes. And he leads a lot of the operational work, I lead a lot of the funding and federal grant work, as well as some other things. So this is really foundational to do everything else, state dollars, local funding, as well as federal dollars. It is absolutely necessary to continue to have this conversation. I can say, if we can all think back a decade, how much our education has changed just in the last decade. Not to mention 30 years when the BEP was first established. So it is necessary to kind of revisit this hard work. I would say, I think we all understand. There's a reason probably no one has taken this on in 30 years. It is certainly a very complex body of work, but that doesn't mean it shouldn't be done. It doesn't mean that the time isn't now. So our hope today is really to get more feedback on the state local contribution component, but also know that as more information becomes available, and as the subcommittees continue that development, we will certainly be coming back to this group and others to continue that discussion, probably in a more kind of tactical way with modeling and spreadsheet and all the things that Sam loves. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to him to go over some of that initial feedback, just to kind of ground our conversations, because I know that superintendents are very engaged, CFOs may be engaged, the level of engagement of others could vary. And so I want to make sure we can ground the rest of the morning in just some high level summary feedback. Sam? He doesn't like the microphone, I think he should force him to use it, but I'm just putting it out there.
Can everyone hear me in the back okay? Well, so my name is Sam Piercy, Deputy Commissioner of Operations, and that is bright light. I'm going to come over to the side of it. What I want to say on the onset here is a genuine thank you. I know it is no small feat, especially this close to the holidays, for you all to take time off to bring your community leaders here for this conversation. So truly thank you for being here. What I wanted to start with today is giving a little bit of grounding of what we want to discuss with you and frame up what will come later in the discussion section, but make sure that you have a general understanding of what all this means. What are we talking about? What are we looking at? I think that when we talk about school funding, everything gets really focused in how do we build up what we are going to fund students to do, right? What are all the parts that go into that? What are the inputs we want to look at? And that's right. That is part of this really big, robust conversation being held with 18 subcommittees, massive public comment. And I really hope you and all of your community members are engaging on that. The follow-up step to that is deciding once that pie is filled, the metaphor that always gets applied to this conversation, the pie, right? How do we pay for it? What does that shared responsibility look like between the state and locals? And that's what we want to get this person some feedback on, is not to make a decision on that. That's not what we're looking for. We want to pick your brains about how do we approach that conversation? What does that need to look like? Because it has a lot of implications for you and your community. So to delve into that, I'm going to start with the fundings, this big conversation that's happening about what do we need, what are we looking at and building out what could be a new formula. And then we'll kind of shift more towards the local contribution. So just to give you a sense of what has been the topic of all of this, and that is a shift to a student-based funding model from a resource-based model. A lot of people have questions about what does that mean? How does it really look different? And what I want to start by saying is that if you include DC in there, you've got 39 states who are using some sort of student-based model. And the single biggest difference is that when we think about a resource model, which is what DEP is largely considered, that means that we're looking at how many students do you have to generate a teacher, i.e. a resource, and then we fund that resource, right? That's one lens of looking at things. But let's take special education as an example here. Right now, we have a funding formula that says if you fall into option 1 through 10, you generate 1/85th of a teacher, up to 1.85 of a teacher, right? And that's what we fund. Versus taking a student-based approach that says, hey, option 1 may include something like speech therapy. What does it actually look like to fund speech therapy for that student? And how do we consider that rather than putting this in-between step that loses a little bit of that connection? Because anyone who's been in schools knows that if the best ratio that you can get is 1 to 8.5 on a caseload of special education, I guarantee you all have students who require lower than that, some even 1-to-1. Right? So it's a different framing of looking at things. Technology is another good example, right? 40 million was put into the support technology as a resource for districts a few years back. But what you all know is that your tech directors are coming to you and saying, we're going to stay 1-to-1, we have to have a refresh plan. So what does that look like for a student over time? What does that investment need to look like? That's what we're talking about in a student-based model. This is super small, so I will give you the high level. This is what has been kind of the general framing of what a student-based model could look like. That very bottom of the pyramid is a base, and the amount allocated to each student, no matter their unique characteristics, no matter where they are in the state, right? This is funding all of those core components of what education needs to look like in Tennessee. That second level is weights. So what about student characteristics or something else may be a unique attribute that warrants additional funding? And how do you consider that relative to one another? That third tier is direct funding. So what are targeted initiatives that warrant specific dollars? Think about your AP dual credit or your ACT free take. Those are exact dollar figures for exact students who are participating in it. And then that top level is outcomes. What might it look like to incentivize certain programs to be offered when we're seeing strong gains in given areas? What I want to call out for this group is what we've heard as being requested. So this is feedback from the field, from the 1870s, from public comment, and from you all and other avenues. First, a request. Districts should not receive less state funding than they receive through the current BEP. Translation, we need more money. That's understood, right? And I think that the piece that the commissioner has shared often in first statements in this is that we've not seen a revised funding formula be passed in any state that didn't come with additional money. Second, maintain flexibility for local district funding. So those of you who are familiar with the basic education program, the BEP will know that it's often referenced as a funding formula, not a spending formula, right? That means districts maintain the flexibility to choose how those dollars are spent to best meet the needs of their students. No one has talked about revising the state, right? So the new funding formula is still intended to be that, a funding formula, not a spending. Third, ensure that whatever is currently funded outside the BEP is included in the new formula. So there are a number of grants that are scattered throughout state law that provide funding to districts, right? Coordinated school health, school safety, all of those require additional applications in the state's grant management system. They require additional paperwork, additional follow-up, right? The request has been move those into the formula, right? We understand the requirements still stick there. You still need emergency operation plan. You still have to do drill work. But rather than have one other step out here, fold that step into the formula. And then that also provides districts with the flexibility to use those dollars as they best see fit. And I want to go ahead and make one disclaimer here from a lot of the feedback we've heard already in these sessions. That is not a bait and switch move, right? It is a very clear transition of the grant dollars from the second program into the funding formula, not an attempt to say, well, we moved this money over and the pot grew, right? So I just want to be clear about that on the front end as well. And finally, and important for today, the local match component should be stable, what it would be under the BEP for 3 to 5 years. So this is what impacts the local contribution section, right? Right now, you all as county commissioners, as mayors, as school board leads, as districts, know what your district is expected to put in for education. You cannot plan on a dime to change that number just. And that's what has been acknowledged here. And we'll get into that a little bit more as we go through it. So I just want to highlight real quickly, and again, we'll make this deck available. So if it's too small to read or anything like that, please know that we will share it out. This is just initial feedback on the formula side, things that have been bubbling up most often in the feedback that we've heard. So things that have been considered in the base. For those of you who have followed the BEP review committee recommendations over the last decade, these items are the ones we still are continuously hearing about, and they're being surfaced in this conversation as well. Nurses, either at every school or at least meeting the nationally recommended ratio. Same thing for counselors, school psychologists. Teacher salaries and benefits continues to remain the primary component of the conversation. One principal at every school. And flexibility for facility funding and or deferred maintenance. This one's been a really hot topic, and as an ops guy close to my heart. We've got a lot of aging schools in this state that have a lot of deferred maintenance we've got to take care of. So all of those were things to be considered in the base. Ways. Again, this is what's tagged on for unique student characteristics or unique district characteristics. Economically disadvantaged and concentration of poverty. So not just what does your direct certification rates look like for students, but also how much of that do you have in a given school. So think about your Title I schools. That is a level of poverty that may differ from other places. Students with disabilities, English learners continue to remain hot topics. Rural and sparsity. So this was one that we didn't project on the front end, but was a really good point, right? Rural, we knew was going to be a popular topic, but sparsity also came up. So how spread out is your county, right? When you talk about 4 schools in a rural area that is in a special school district cluster really tightly together. It's a very different transportation cost than when your schools are 45 miles apart, right? And trying to account for that in the waivers. And then those last two have also come up through this document, fast growing districts and charter enrollment. I do want to flag areas that we thought we would hear more about that have not come up as frequent. But again, if anything that I do, let me pause and say, public comment is not over. It is an ongoing thing. So please don't, this is a snapshot in time of where things are. Please encourage ongoing feedback in the public comment process. We expected to hear a little bit more on these and not so far. Gifted, dyslexia, small LEA size, and K-12 small class size. So how we think about differentiating some class size for our earliest learners. Additional dollars. So these are items that just received a lot of positive feedback in the conversation. Should money be available? When we talk about that direct funding. Financial literacy, middle school CTE. For those of you who work with our federal Perkins grant, you'll know that it recently was extended down the months. What might it look like for state funds to help supplement that? Innovative high school models. So it's a great program run with our relief dollars at the state level. It was immensely popular, but how do we sustain that moving forward? Extended school year, that tended to actually focus more on the summer programming that's been underway and what it might look like to sustain that more intentionally. RTI, you all know this is a topic that has bubbled up a lot. Right now, the funding formula covers it at the district level. What might it look like to consider that as a program with things and high dosage too? Last but not least, the outcomes section. Positive feedback on these items, early post-secondary opportunities, AP course completion, industry certifications, and work-based learning. Again, focusing on our kids either post-secondary or workforce ready when they're leaving our schools. Again, I want to reiterate, this process isn't over. So by all means, we welcome and encourage you to be involved in other comments, share feedback. All of that gets rolled up to those subcommittees that will ultimately pass on the recommendations to the steering committee. So I'm going to pivot a little bit here and move into a general overview of what the basic education program does now, with a specific emphasis on the conversation point for today, which is the local contributions. So I'm asking for everyone to just give me a little grace and join this pivot from the building of the pie conversation to how do we talk about what the cost sharing models should look like. So for those of you who have not necessarily engaged with the basic education program robustly, it is our state funding model. It provides the basic level of funding for education across the state. It includes 47 different components spread across 4 different categories. And when we think about how that plays out for the local versus state cost sharing, each of the 4 big buckets, the 4 big categories of the BEP, each starts with a baseline split. So for the instructional component of the BEP, the instructional category, the state picks up 70% as a starting point, locals pick up 30%. That varies all the way down to 50-50 for our non-classroom. So again, we start with that basic split assumption. Then it is further adjusted for local fiscal capacity. So we'll talk a little bit more about fiscal capacity in a moment, but that 70-30 split is then further adjusted for county's ability to raise local taxes. So if the county's ability is higher, then they will pick up a little bit more than that 70-30 split. It may shift to 68-32. If the fiscal capacity of the county is lower, the state will pick up a higher percentage, 72%, right? 28%. And then this is something that you all live and breathe every day as your local revenues. That is in general the highest proportion coming from property tax, but you may have other taxes in the local area that are contributing to your education one. So fiscal capacity. This is the biggest kind of variable in the conversation around what local versus state might look like. While there's a lot of financial modeling that goes underneath that, at a top line level, it's an attempt to measure the ability of a county to raise local taxes for education. The first thing that I want to share about this is it is not what is actually raised. There is a difference, right? This measure is looking at the county's ability to raise taxes. So if a county has just increased property values skyrocketing through, but property taxes are not going up, like it is a measure of the first, not of the second of the state. It determines each county's ability based on average rates across the state. So again, this is all kind of measuring relative fiscal capacity. And then it's determined at the county level, not at the individual district level. For anyone who has a city school district or special school district embedded in, fiscal capacity is only determined at the county level right now. And for the BEP, it uses a combination of two different calculations, one from TASER, one from UT Knoxville's Center for Business and Economic Research. That provides two different expert lenses on it. Those are each weighted 50% and kind of plugged together to come up with the overall fiscal capacity. What does all this generate for you as local officials? Two important numbers, and your finance directors will know these numbers extremely well. Right? They live and breathe these. The first is the required local match. So that is just what is the output of that formula once we apply the basic split and the adjustment for fiscal capacity. That is what in state laws locals are required to put in to support public education. There is a separate law that also dictates a maintenance of effort requirement. In general, it says that locals are required to put in as much money this year as they did last year into the public education system. There are exceptions for if you have a decrease in your student enrollment over time. But both of these come into play when we think about what does a local cost sharing model look like with this state. Here's where we're going to connect all these points. So while the broader funding formula conversation is happening, and while we're looking at what currently is happening under the basic education program, this is where the feedback is leading us for an initial starting point of this conversation. Here's what I can tell you as a little bit of a number cruncher guy. You all cannot make recommendations and help inform what a good local contribution methodology might look like until you know the actual numbers. Like we know that. You can't make a commitment about what local communities can and can't do until you know the actual numbers and how this plays out for your local communities. We get that. So what we are proposing is to split this into a two-step process. There's urgency about getting more money to kids into schools now. So step one, let's get that formula built. That is the work of those 18 subcommittees, the recommendation to the steering committee, and ultimately the decision of the General Assembly. Let's take 12 months, initial proposal. Let's take 12 months to have a deeper conversation about when and if a new formula is passed, what that could mean for local contributions. You can see the numbers. You can see how it plays out for your districts, which are not answers we have for you today. I understand that is the first and foremost question. I get that. But here's what I want to acknowledge. We took this intentionally as really building it from the input of stakeholders across the state. So I've heard a lot of comments of like, it's hard to know when I don't have something to react to. But if we're meaning to build it based on input, we're in a chicken and egg scenario. We're doing it on the input side. So as soon as we've got something to share with you, you know we will. And we know this local contribution conversation can't go much further without being able to answer those two questions. So again, let's take 12 months to meaningfully have a conversation once you have numbers and formula in your hand. Here's what that would mean. Local districts could see more state funding in the new formula, but local communities would not have to contribute anything additional for at least 5 years. What that breakout would look like is to say, let's take 1 year to decide what a new local contribution formula could be or not. I'm not saying it can't be the existing one, right? But let's have those conversations about what that starting point split should be. Let's have the conversation about fiscal capacity. Is it working well? Is it capturing what you need it to? Is it not? Do we need to bring in experts and have those conversations? And then let's acknowledge that there's still a ramp up time after that decision is made. Right? This is going to have implications. way or another for your budgeting practices at a minimum, like, let's give that window of time to adjust to that as well. So potentially 1 year to have the conversation, come up with a new proposal, or to stick with the same. And then up to 4 years after that to really shift to whatever that might be. That's where we're going to start today. And when we shift to the discussion section that you will come back to facilitate, what I'm asking you all to keep in mind is to really think about this local contribution piece. We want to hear your feedback on the formula piece and any thoughts or reflections you have there. But what these unique people around each table can help inform is what is it do you need to know in order to have a good year-long conversation about this? What are the considerations that are on people's radar that we haven't thought through yet that need to be surfaced during that process? And then feedback on that initial recommendation, right? If this doesn't sound right to you, we want to hear that too. This is what we're starting with from our feedback from the field. Before I kick it over to Eve, are there any questions about where we stand right now or what the focus will be during the discussion section today? All right.
Thank you, Sam, for bringing on that. I know that is a lot of information to take in. And as Sam said, also, we're just going to spend some time talking through, and really asking you all to work as a team. The team that you brought in instances where maybe you argue by yourself, you circle up with others to have this conversation, because we need your input. This is to have all of the stakeholders in this room together talking about this and surfacing things that need to be considered. That is an opportunity I don't want to miss to inform what happens next. And some of the same said, as the subcommittees and others that are working on the actual formula development to submit to the steering committee, et cetera, really trying to make sure that we include all of the considerations that we need to be having. So once those numbers are provided, we can stand ready to think about what that would look like for that local split, the state and local split contribution. So what we'll do next bit of time is, first of all, I'd like for you to circle up as to kind of spread out to be able to talk and really tackle a couple of discussion questions. First, kind of more we'll process a little bit. So the second one, thinking about what other considerations we'll tackle those in the second questions. But here is what we want to know. From your role, and you all also have very different roles in your districts and counties, what additional information, we know you can get out, we know that, but what other information would you need to be able to talk this through with your stakeholders about that state and local contribution discussions? And so I tried to put in a few little items for you to kind of frame your conversations. If you had to think the top three things as a local leader, what would they be? What are those things that you feel like right now you don't know that you would need? The other things I would say, like what data points you hold in those conversations? In our earlier sessions, the two sessions we had yesterday, someone said, you know, it'd be really helpful to have local tax information or some kind of historical look back on what our county has done or what it has looked like statewide over time. So thinking about what are the three things that are top of mind for you, your role. The second thing would be what data do you need that we can help provide to help facilitate those discussions and conversations. And thirdly, like, are there key areas that like, look, we need to know more about X. We need to break down, we need to understand what Tesla and receiver are and how those work. Are there other topics that you all think, in order for us to do this well, we need this information, we need a session on this, et cetera, because we come back to you all in January. I want to make sure we're meeting the needs that you have, because this is absolutely, it has impacts to all of us and to all of you. And so we want to be thoughtful about kind of asking what else is needed for you all to lead discussions, conversations, and to be able to contribute to those decisions. As Sam said, listen, if we move forward with where we are right now, when we take 12 months to do this well, we can actually be thoughtful and really dig in what's behind the numbers, running different models, providing some baseline training. If there are other people that's like, hey, we have to have something to bring you this. We need to know who those are. We need to know how best to support this decision. As Jim said, it's true. There is a reason this hasn't been happening in 30 years. It's a big lift. It is a very big lift that involves a lot of people. And so our goal today is the first with other conversations to begin to have that discussion and not make a decision that will impact you and your tax and your community in the future. So going to think about it as if we had this 12-month period to do this component very well, what do you need? So I'm going to give you all a couple of months to circle up with your team, so find a team if you're kind of on your own. And I'm going to do about 15 to 20 minutes for you to talk through those three things. And then some lucky person in your team could share to the group. Because I think that part is maybe overlooked. Oftentimes you're like, I didn't think of that. Sam was mentioning out a couple of things that we've heard already. That's something that had not had surfaced. So I do think feedback and others can certainly inform your thoughts and decisions as well. Any questions before we transition to a team discussion here? All right, well, circle up and hopefully we can have to get it on about 15, 20 minutes. Start your conversation. That is teamwork. Okay. It calls for your understanding the kind of people. Those topics that we talk about a whole lot. So this person will get to hear this. Or, and each of you, you're having some work down in the water, starting at 9:30. Just saying, moments, if you need to get out here, before that, patient the water was coming in, so. Let's. All right, so I hope that you have the time to think about some of these questions. options. But it leads to any questions that you may have, and so saying, these videos, I will, do my very best to, usually I get someone to help me with that, and she had to do some things. So, want to hear from you and share some of the highlights of what your team is talking about, and we are going to start in the back.
Information that we feel like as a county would be more information regarding CASER and CDER sessions to help inform everyone. So we're all on the same page. A consideration that we would ask for in the funding formula consideration for the local contribution would be possibly to look at the penny value that a county generates versus the property tax rate itself. Another would be considerations for what we consider right now unfunded mandates. Considerations of the number of schools and the county size, the sparsity. We were very glad to see that, because that's something that definitely affects us that we had not heard. Also, any consideration in the local contribution or the credit that the county contributes for debt service. Like in our county absorbs all of our debt service. We're very fortunate there. It doesn't come out of the school budget, so could the county get credit for that in some form or fashion? Also, like our SROs are funded through the county, so that would be a consideration that our county elected officials ask for consideration in a formula. Also, an analysis of the districts that are under the 81 Act, which we are, versus those that stand alone. And another consideration would be at the local level, the concern for what happens in year 6. That was a consideration.
Well, that will start, those are great samples, exactly big values, so we can flag a couple of things. And I do think those are important flags, and we've heard quite a bit as well. And I do think information on models and tasks and see, there are other models that we should be looking at in addition to those two in this larger discussion. We also flagged the SRO piece. And I know that there's been conversation about that being part of the base. So as we talk through kind of today, but also in the feedback window that's open right now, those are the things that we should think about submitting comments on, because I definitely know, and I've been doing kind of, sorry, I'm trying to list it out here. I've been doing some other individual conversations as kind of Megan McElroy and Dave Thompson, to get some other feedback. You've heard a lot about this at the middle school, the high school level. And should there be a distinction between elementary, middle, and high? At least to look like. So appreciate those really good flags, and thank you all for your thoughtful feedback there. We are going to move across the back road to the street.
One thing we'd like to see is comparison between district and home building. Since there's so many states that are already doing it, there should be access to your favorites, moving forward and through the new formula. Another thing is, will there be a lag in the budget, that's just the information, add information, the outcomes, and then extra dollars, nothing there. When will that, get extra to those?
That's a really great class. So we moved that and that relies on requiring your data. Should we do that? And then the implication to that topic, the speed of the topic, really good flag. And just to make sure I do your comment correctly, you're saying like once they build the speed, we're going to do a comparison and say, here's what they did under the old one versus here in Tennessee. That's what I'm going to clarify that. Again, those are the types of things that we can also begin to think about how do we provide that as we come back around in January to have additional discussions about this. Those are things that we can hopefully be able to help kind of provide some of you have the information that you need. Really appreciate that. Yes, sir.
And of course, we're in a small business. And for a small business, we are granted, we have a ton of kids. Like my administrators, whatever, go homeschool. And this whole thing is the money's most volatile student. So what happens when we lose a lot of dollars, we've got to fix our enrollment, fix up that salary then.
So a couple of things that you guys, so the money, that term has been used, some early conversation. Let me say this, the money has always followed the student need. So for example, if the student moves from Crossville to Cookville, Crossville no longer gets the funding that that student, that ATM is counted in the Cumberland County, not in Cumberland County, for example. But what we don't say is it does not follow the student to a private school. So just to be clear, let me just say that out loud, this is funding formula, but it is really intended to ensure that the money that the district that is providing the services to that student gets the money. And I can say in conversations I have directly, there are oftentimes, districts that have open enrollment. We have some of these students from a different district. This is really trying to make sure, and some of the have those kind of handshake agreements, formal agreements, but really the extent is to make sure that a student has what either student needs and making sure the money gets to the district that's actually providing the EL services, the additional support for a student with disability, for example, or any other student for that, or just a regular student. So I appreciate that feedback, very helpful. And again, applying things different than the other districts, so I really appreciate that. This is good practice.
Touched on several things that we had talked about, components with a chart that actually shows what we have now, what you're looking at to go to the future, with some type of indication of what can't be changed, what is guaranteed not to be changed, and what the possibilities would be. With Gladstone County, our county only generates $20,000, so it's very important. You talk about maintenance of effort, that we really have no place to go to get that extra money. But on the other hand, to the maintenance of effort entity, it only penalizes the school board. The county commission has really no accountability for not meeting that. So I feel like that it should be some type of local accountability outside the street or maintenance of effort that could be interesting. And again, we have very little knowledge of the places. I understand taxes have been college districts for the last few years. We've had very little lots of tax returns. And all the 5 years we have no difference. 5 years, but how close, how far through the 5 durations are we going to be getting some type of indication of what we're looking at and possibly changing? You talk about sparsity, in our county, plateaus and balance. You can't get each other easily. So we'll do the geographical landscape included in this conversation.
Those are great points because you're exactly right. Let's go. You can navigate it. Great. But again, great feedback, and appreciate that. I think the kind of components are, the one thing I'm just going to flag here is that one of the things that we've been talking a lot about is, we're actually in districts and communities for a lot of transparency for all. That's the plans that you all are sending in and the public and the accountability for that. That is one of the pieces that we are excited about with rethinking this formula so that it would be very transparent and very easy to explain. I know a lot of the guys just like we said, this to someone probably Sandy, Mary University, she's lucky I can drive her every day, but she could drive. But again, that's one hand fingers to spare, so we could probably do that well. So holding ourselves accountable for transparency, in this formula, and that would be the things that we just described, we could become this. Something that you said, I think is really helpful is to think about, what, like you said, what can and cannot be changed. Because the other piece of all of this, and some of the feedback that I believe us to heard is, how do you ensure that there is a level of stability that isn't about change in one or two students' enrollment that somehow messes up your funding structure. So trying to maintain, it's a little bit of decision to say, we're gonna make sure kids have what they need, but we're also trying to be what this gentleman just did and have this happening, that you can have stability year to year so that you can plan and budget appropriately for kids. So really, it's
Like school board transfer. Things are not have. But those are having to look at that. Feel that.
Thank you for that comment, that you know that, and it's something that we've also focused on. How, going in, just thinking about over the last 2 years, how enrollment has shifted, making sure that we are responsive and thoughtful about can we do that, and if so, what would that require? Appreciate those comments. Ms. Krieger, yes, sir.
I'm kind of shy, everyone is here knows that knows, but we have a lot of problems with this. Number one, we feel like we brought in and doesn't got the beginning of it. There are 9 committees, 7 committees, 5 committees, and 0 local government input on them, other than one person in the county commissioner and he put there and somebody knew he was. That's number one. Number two, we think, what's wrong with these things? Why are we scrapping these things? I know there's problems with BDP, but I think there's nothing wrong with BDP and more funding to fix. And we're told that we need a simpler system. It's simpler, always fair. That's what we're being told. We're being told that it's going to be more fair because it's simpler. BP is complicated for a reason. It's complicated because we all have different needs. And BDP meets those individual needs, may be better than something that's simpler. So those are some of the questions and things we have, and we're very, 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 very concerned about what happens in year 5. You're going to have a whole new administration. You know that. That's why it's year 5, not year 3, not year 2. Somebody else is going to have to deal with whatever starting, whatever happened here. And we don't want to know, yeah, you're going to throw money at us now, and you're going to say, we're not going to cut you anything. You're going to get exactly what you get on the BDP to make it more palatable to us. But what happens in year 5 when those little extra baubles go away? That's our biggest concern. And I've got another long list, but I'm not going to, that's the bigger issues right now. And we feel like, quite honestly, we feel like this has already been decided, it's already been projected. Let's even be in here, it's just as far as to say, well, we got input, right? But you got to pay them in the front.
Well, I appreciate your comments and just welcome the additional feedback that you have. Here's what I would say to that. I can tell you that Sam and I both have lots of things that do other responsibilities, and certainly could tell you we wouldn't be here if we certainly did not want to your feedback and put here. We don't have all the answers, and that's really what we're trying to engage with you now on. I can also say that our ultimate goal is to make sure that we have good money for students and really trying to make sure that we fund education, knowing that right now we're living within the network. Kids have different needs, and we're trying to make sure that we support everyone. But that really is informed by you. It's not built. It has not been built. So I appreciate the feedback, and I will take it on this absolutely.
criticizing you.
It's okay.
And appreciate you being your topic. So you're telling me that what you and Sam hear from us is gonna determine what happened?
Your feedback,
Decision I'm gonna have?
no, sir, you're not, the committee,
I didn't say that y'all had your mind made up. I'm saying the powers that be, the government down and the Secretary of Education have decided what they want to do. This is a backdoor way to get vouchers. That's all it is. You can say you've got 33 states, but there's some of them that are hybrid that are so far away from what you're going to do that it shouldn't even be listed. And if you want to talk about hybrids, we should be hybrid because BEP is hybrid. It is somewhat student funded. So I went this too long. I remember when we implemented BEP, we were a part of that lawsuit against the state, even though at this point. And I know how much of a difference it made. So I have a real problem with us just throwing it out to something else. There's somebody in Kansas, somebody in Florida thinks that it's a good idea.
well, I appreciate your comments and understand, I do, and what I would say is, this is intended to be one level of public education, and that is every conversation I've been part of. Money follows the students, yes, but it is within public education, it is not, at any way connected to vouchers, in any conversation that I was in part. So I know that is appreciated and understand that, the BEP has been in place and we're all relatively comfortable with that. I can tell you, we're not just scrapping, we're looking at what's funded as we think about what should be in that base for all kids. And those are the things that are funded either within the BEP or outside the BEP that Sam talked through earlier. So, please note that your feedback today on the public comments, on sending your written feedback in, is absolutely from us given to our commissioner, our two active subcommittees who are making these decisions. So I really, really appreciate your feedback.
Hard to follow that. But let me say, we look at a couple of things, particularly at looking at the fixed costs. If money follows the student, what about the fixed costs that all of us have? The fixed costs that are there, if money follows the student, I've got one high school. If that student goes to another high school somewhere else, lost that funding, but yet my fixed costs continue. And these fixed costs will go continue, not only, nothing's going down. Cost of the students are not going down. Look at that, and talking about aging infrastructure. I've got aging infrastructure in Kansas County. And what do we do about that? We're looking at some things locally we can do. But the fixed cost is, I think, is a critical issue as well as our commission and others. So if you lose the funding, you've lost the funding to be more equitable. Also, we're looking at fiscal capacity. The fiscal capacity argument is going to be there wherever, whatever you do. Fiscal capacity, where are we at? Are we at max? Is that going up? And now, one thing that we talked about even further at the last forum, over engagement, was that, and then another forum where we ran, we say that this is the cost of whichever. I know the BEP is the BEP right now, but it's at 75%. Is that going to go up? Is that go up to 80%, 90% of a lot of actually get down? We're not talking about that. I agree with my friends in White County. We never really funded BEP fully in the first place. It's always been a percentage and not. So that's another issue. But where are we at? Another thing I think we need to look at too is projections. What are the projections of growth in the future? I don't want to get a dead horse and send the sidewalk for the county. It's growing county into a city. But I've got to compete for teachers. I've got to compete for funding, and their projected growth according to Unity is going up to 500,000 by 2050. And Canyon County is what they say, we're going down. You can't tell me that we're going down, we're sitting by a county going there. got people coming in from Rutherford County right now, and what they're doing, they're willing to spend coming to Kenny County's board taxes. And then, now where they send their students, their kids, sending their kids, we've got 70 schools right there on our board that come into Kenny County, they're looking sending kids to private schools in Rutherford County. But yeah, what happens there? So projections of growth is very much so. And one thing too, we looked at, there are political leaders and legislators. I know that's the next step. We all know that. That's the next step in the general city.
Sure.
Is where all this is going to happen. And there's another funding, and even you probably have to side that with this. It's on your free and reduced funding for your free and reduced students, so economically disadvantaged, which is our biggest subgroup. The ones that fill out the free and reduced form, they're not counted. It's only the direct cert that is counted on that. That is an equity that needs to be addressed, That's a state one that I can't count the ones that get the free and reduced lunch for, but I have to count the direct cert. I don't get to count that. And those are never counted and are economically disadvantaged. And that's the big deal. So I appreciate that. So thank y'all for doing that.
Of course, and you raised some of the points that I think actually your team is up in the next. When you're talking about projections, I think that's really important. When you think about this sort of consideration, and the fact that as the state is growing, we have, industry coming in different sections of the state that actually have a look at that. And so thinking about that, I do want to say, just to call out, when the BPP was originated, it was never that the state would pick up the full 100%. There was always a split. And I think the point that I think that you raised about the non-instructional classroom component, that's part of what we expect to happen if we take this 12-month period to talk about that split. Because is it going to change from 50-50 or back to 70-30? Those are things that really a longer conversation should serve us to your point exactly. And I definitely appreciate the comment on fixed costs. And that's been the thing for me is to say, when we talk about the sustainability, we want to make sure that as it is now, this is not something that, you have to, bring your hands up whether you lose you students here and there. You still have to operate, you still have to open the doors, you still have to put in the building, you still have to be all of the things to make students safe and everything. So I appreciate your comments very, very much. And I think it's great what's there. Yes, sir.
I don't know, we have one that, what's been discussed, mentioned earlier, we're having the discussions, having the formula. It is very difficult for us to have these conversations and ask questions until we see the formula. It's hard for us to explain this to our funding body, so we know what the base rates are going to be, and all of the add-ons. What's that going to look like for us? Our county leaders who are here still, like everyone, need to know more about how tax receiver are calculated. There's a difference in ability to pay and willingness to pay. And we realize how local, our local people are taxed to the max. So if someone's saying, well, you have a higher ability to pay, they have the ability, but our people aren't willing to pay. And our funding body, it's kind of, who's going to make that determination of what that split is going to be? That's the last thing that the mayor asked. Who's going to, how will that be determined? How will the local share be determined? Who will make that decision? What will that look like? Is that going to be another mandate from the state department that is passed down to the local county commission funding body? Or will there be some way to balance that?
Sure. I think those are all great pieces of feedback. And to say, just to let you all know, right now, the subcommittees are continuing to meet. We expect that they will, over the next several weeks, in January, come to a consensus on what proposal goes to the steering committee. And so I believe that by close to the end of January, we should have a lot more information that we can do as you just described and provide more information. So that is really, as we were thinking about what timing looks like for this conversation and future conversations, making sure that we have that as one of the key kind of components to continue the conversation.
So is the intent still to have this in front of the General Assembly by the end of January? Maybe in the next session?
So let me see that out. Yes, I think the claim for the funding formula is standing called part one. Yes, if we go forward with what we think would be a longer conversation with the local plan, that would be language that would be included in that proposal, say that this is a period of time that we would spend developing a state local split, and then we would take that proposal back, in the submission.
That's my future. Make a decision in January and May when session wraps. If we're saying, yeah, we're telling the local bodies here, we've got 12 months, I don't know if that's gonna hold like.
So what they determine is the full balance, and then what will happen in the next 12 months, but you all will stay the same, right? So nothing will change for you as to what you're doing right now. And then, of course, in the next 12 months, the state will just pick up that difference, so that you're not doing anything. And even at that, if this happens, and they pass something, and we spend, we spend the next 12 months developing that local component, that still will be a 4-year on rate on that, and in that interim time, we would have to make up the difference, until we fully transition. That's the model, as I understand it, but it isn't something to say, we're gonna rush something through here, we're going to, because of the impacts locally, we felt like it warranted, a little more of a longer conversation, knowing that whether it's tax or city from the 50-50 split, do we go with something else? Do we revisit the instructional, non-instructional components in those splits? That's really what we're trying to do, is just make sure that we have all these considerations, and you all have flags and really great things that we will be part of this next month.
Last thing. Sure. So it's been mentioned several times, the money following the student. And I think this will help us a little bit, you know, current BDP, you're right, the student leaves Putnam County, goes to Boyd County, but the money, if there's a year lag, which I think is why we're funded on last year's student enrollment, we will still need that type of assurance because we have to place our teacher and people in place for the school year. So whenever that may be, we get our final allocation. May or June from BDP, we know that's what we have for the coming fiscal year. And we have to because we've got to put the teachers in place, and if we have growth, we do pick that up, and there's typically a growth component that we get in January.
Yeah.
We're still, I would love to have it, but at least some assurance
Yes.
that we've got that funding for the following school year. And we know that if we lose, 10, 20, 30 students over the course of the year, that's money we're not going to have.
I agree. I think that's a very, very strong point here as well. Just trying to make sure that, again, that the formula is still stable enough for the institutions that mentioned, and it's not, and know exactly what we have, what the duration of the I think that's a great point. I appreciate that very much. Next. Okay.
That's everything that we talked about in our table. It's already been discussed. I do appreciate you here. One thing that we would like you to take into consideration. Our needs in Chicken County are different as in Bledsoe County. We have those smaller schools that will not meet the national ratio. We will need a 250 ratio for a school nurse. So we ask that you take into consideration the possibility of the first school. Another thing that I guess I just wanted to express my concern over. We went ahead and took the plunge and hired 2 SROs. We are paid for those out of local funding. I'd like to see a possibility that we can go back and apply for to pay for at least one of those SROs.
So a couple of things to that, I think that's, you actually just described what I think it is so important in this conversation. I've been in districts that say, you know what, we have 2 schools that share a nurse, we have 3 schools sharing a nurse, or this school on Sunday, this on Friday, but kids don't get to get sick only on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And so when we talk about what is needed at every building, a nurse,
Assistant principal.
so I can heard that, especially with the teacher evaluation model as it currently standing. I've heard that from every district I've spoken with directly. So those are the kinds of things, and that is the feedback that absolutely needs to be given. I will share with this conversation, But the call out for escorts, the call out for assistant principals, those are the pieces that we have to make sure, and in my mind, the stronger the base, that is the part that we feel like strongest, that this is what should be true in every building. It doesn't matter if you have, 250 kids or 230 kids. And that's really what they're trying to move away from, is that kind of resource to say, you have to have this amount of students to earn a principal or a full-time principal or an assistant principal. So thinking about what should be true of every school, what should be there, and that is actually what's in the base, and whether that includes a social worker or behavior interventionist, et cetera. But making sure that feedback gets out there. So I think what you just described, everywhere I've shared it, but certainly I'm referring to all of that as well.
So this is my question.
It's been,
At what point do we have that serious discussion as to what goes in that base? Because if this is being taken to legislation for the upcoming session, that's happening. So
well, that's why the feedback period is out there right now. I'm completely interested, and I would strongly encourage you to, in writing, send that feedback in. Because that is the feedback that goes through the commissioner's office and to the subcommittees. Those are the things that we are hearing about the exact things that we are looking in a number of conversations. And so the more that is stated, the more it can be considered in that case. That is truly what I would encourage you to do, and use your groups to also indicate that. And you all work closely with TOS, with VA, and others in those roles to make sure that your voice and your desires, especially at the same time, that some of those weights are around student groups, but other weights are around poverty, rural, sparsity. Those are the pieces. So really trying to make sure that you all voice, especially the things that are specific to your district that should be considered. I really love involved in that.
this is just a comment. I have two bookkeepers that are pretty on top of it. They went to the TOS meeting the other day, and I know several people in this room was at that TOS meeting. The comment that was given to me after that meeting was, if they're wanting to do a new formula and completely do away with the PPP and not talk about the PPP and make a completely new formula, that's like you get 4 flat tires on your car and it's brand new. Why do you buy a new car? You're asking us to buy a new car instead of fixing the flat tires. So why can't we just take the BEP and increase the amount of money that goes into the BEP and provide those incentives? And if you can put the coordinated school health money in there, the MRC money in there, then increase that pot of money that gives us enough to allow us to do what we need to be doing. You know, all I'm asking for is in Pickett County, is to give my students the same opportunities that every other county in the state has. And we can't do that. I can't put a higher burden on taxpayers in Pickett County, because we have a majority of retired people in our community, and that's just a big burden that has to be. So what scares me with this thing is the local match going to be required to be higher?
No, I don't think that's been decided at all. No one has said the local match would be required to be higher. Every district in the state, set free, funded above the local required local match, every one of you. So does that mean that you might have to make an adjustment? You could not, you continue to fund, so long as you're above that required local match. And so I would say, just for that, I appreciate your comments. I really do, and I think that is what this formula is intended to try to do, is make sure that every student, regardless of where they live, have the opportunities that you just described. And I would appreciate you flagging it. I will take the feedback. As part of this, I also hope that you all will, send them that feedback directly as well, so it's not coming through me. I appreciate that very much. Yeah, a couple more groups are running us on time, but I think you all can hit on a lot of things on the next discussion, so, I think you'll be okay. This group.
I'll go real quick because I don't think I can say anything that hasn't been said already. I just think top three things we need to know. We just need more information. We need to know what the base is. I think ultimately, if that base is more and we can make some decisions around that, then I think local funding bodies can make better informed decisions around that. I think from the school system standpoint, this is what Diane said, with that base includes coordinated school health, if that includes all the things, we just need to know what that looks like. So that in turn, we can make informed decisions from the county's perspective. And it's not fair to turn around and add to that tax base. So ultimately, it's all been said, but once we know that, then we need more information on Tasser and Seaver and all that. How they play through it. That would just be my addition.
I appreciate that. And I think, you know, getting those numbers in front of you and what all is kind of included in it, and then we the portion to what will come in the next conversation. Appreciate it. Last but certainly not least, oh, I didn't need you.
Well, I think you take into the small districts.
Sure.
What you earn and what you need are two different things. Cost of living is such that $10, $8, $9, $10 an hour. The teacher assistant, you know, when they say the legislature, they fund the 2% raise, they fund it. In reality, the people you need to run a school system, the money the state provides, classified employees, et cetera, is completely different. And a 2% raise is just for a certain number of people. The general public don't know that. But it takes a lot more people to operate, not just teachers, but aides and secretaries. But there needs to be consideration of those ones.
That's a great one. I think that's one of the other things that when we were talking, when I was having a conversation about what should be in that base, it was a lot of things beyond the classroom teacher, of course, and assistant principal was one. You know, we heard counselors, additional counselors, for certain grade levels, heard ed assistants, things like that. What else should be included in that base? And I do think
Assistant principals.
assistant principals probably was there, and appreciate that conversation earlier as well. Now, last one.
Just a couple of things that we wanted to bring to everyone's attention for our thoughts. It's just that it's simple, and it's simple to explain to the funding body that it's very easily explained. Second is not only as Putnam County is describing, you know, we get this money, we know that's the money we're going to get for the year, you know, we don't get our final application or final notice until July. We're already in our budget here by that. So I would like to see something happen where we get that number much earlier in our budgeting process, where we know ahead of time so we can start building that budget and moving there. And then finally, I think, you know, what we're talking about here is I feel like that in the pyramid that you showed, the direct portion really, you know, if we're going to be talking about, well, we want to make sure that there's a school nurse in every school, then the state needs to fund a school nurse in every school. And that needs to be in that direct portion. So maybe that direct portion needs to be at the bottom. You say, okay, this is what we're funding from, you know, for each school. We're looking at, okay, White County's got X number of schools, Putnam County's got X number of schools. We fund this many things from this many schools. And then we start talking about a per pupil funding mechanism for supplies and stuff like that. But there needs to be in that, the base really needs to encompass, you know, what it takes for each school.
That's right. That's what it's supposed to do. I think that direct slide, that's not the way with the direct, is really about directly for students who are doing said thing, right? That's where that, if you're in an AP class, if you do ACT or advanced placement, funding a student directly for that. So in other words, you wouldn't be funding an elementary school for AP. You would only fund that for the students who would be taking advantage. I think to your point about the nurse though, that would and should be in the base because we're saying that it's not specific. It is what should be true for all students in every building. And so that's what I think that base is intended to do. I do think the comment about the budget and timing of that is really important, knowing that based on current trends, you're already in the next budget cycle. I think that's fair. Anything else there? So a couple of things as I wrap up here. I think most of you all have flagged some of those considerations. I heard some of the back and even the plus line. But a couple things I'll just put in your thoughts as we think about this. Some things we heard from others would be your existing tax structure. We have districts that rely solely on property tax. We have others that have wheel tax, some of those things are maxed out. Thinking about that, but also accounting for inflation, cost of living, and how that would work in a new model. And then, of course, we mentioned over here about the projections. And that to me is what should you be thinking about in the future? You want to introduce it to one of the largest, fastest growing counties in the state, or you're in West Tennessee and Ford is building a little city that is going to have a significant impact on all of that. So thinking about what does it look like in the future and what do you all need to think about there? The structure was also like who's there, who's making the decision. Those are some of the other pieces that we were thinking about is if we do this over like 12-month period, what does that look like? Are they information sessions? Are they work sessions? Are they us to do, or is it a combination of things? Knowing that we need a base level of information on things like CBER or task models, for example. But knowing also that slide, I was just saying, knowing how things change. I want to do a couple things here before we wrap. But also knowing that you can change roles and positions. So how do you ensure that if you worked over a 12-month period, brought people in, done a training on tax and secret, run some audits, and all of a sudden you have changed. And all of a sudden now you have someone in the conversation that maybe missed all of that. So how do we and make sure that we have some continuity in those next several months as we think about over the next 12 months as we think about this component. My ask of you at this moment would be to go back and have more conversations with folks who were not here today. Collect that feedback and respond to the survey. And as I've shared, send it directly to that address. It is, as I said, important that I will absolutely take it back, but also important for them to hear your local contacts in the feedback. And so I would encourage you strongly to do that. I do want to close by saying a couple of things. I will not be able to be around because I'm probably going to be late to Cleveland, but I would say two things. Thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for carrying that you're doing today. And I ask that you stay with us through this. I know that this is the first of a number of the follow-ups that will come on this topic. As I said, it's not a simple thing. It's not a clean cut. And if it were, we probably all wouldn't be here. And so I just want to say, the fact that you're here and stayed with us for 2 hours today, tell me how much you are invested in this, as I am as my colleagues are. So I would just say thank you again for coming. Please reach out. And all your superintendents and I to get in touch with me. Just really appreciate some of the best feedback I've gotten, and so I really appreciate today. Please be safe. Have a wonderful holiday.
Don't let me get there.